the true art of the deal. Saving money was the key. Chapter 1. Hire the cheapest demolition contractor you can find, even though he has little experience. Trump hired William Kosicki, whose principal business was window washing. Kosicki, in turn, hired what became known as the Polish Brigade, more than 200 immigrants with no working papers who were paid one-third the union rate and worked under difficult conditions.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. Well, the clip you just saw is from the 1991 documentary Trump, What's the Deal? Describing what has been reported in the New York Times, the Trump Tower, the crown jewel of Trump's sprawling empire, its name emblazoned in gold, was built on the backs of Polish workers, many of them underpaid, overworked, and undocumented. It was from that same marbled skyscraper that Donald Trump would launch his presidential bid and promise to build a wall, peppering his speech and many others after with the anti-immigrant rhetoric that electrified his base.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. You wouldn't believe how bad these people are. These aren't people. These are animals. But we have some bad hombres here, and we're going to get them out. Tolerance for illegal immigration is not compassionate. It is actually very cruel.
And Trump is still selling the illegal immigrants boogeyman, ramping it up even more as he gears up for the 2020 election, backed up by the relentless drumbeat of anti-immigrant rhetoric on right-wing media outlets like Fox News. But a Washington Post report reinforces what that 1991 documentary revealed, that Donald Trump's disdain for undocumented labor is and always was a lie. And in fact, he has used undocumented labor for decades to make himself rich. The Washington Post has uncovered a long-running pipeline of undocumented workers who helped to build and maintain Trump's golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey. One of those workers telling the Post, quote, "This golf course was built by illegals." Joining me now is Fernand Amandi, Democratic pollster and host of the podcast Strange Days, Maria Teresa Kumar of Voto Latino, Michelle Goldberg, columnist for the New York Times, and Natasha Bertrand of The Atlantic. Fernand, I'm going to start with you because this incredible reporting from the Washington Post, it's not as if we didn't know that Donald Trump uses undocumented labor and has done for decades. But what these three Post reporters, including David Fairnhold, were able to find was essentially an entire town in Costa Rica that populates Donald Trump's his Bedminster golf club, and that they say the people who employed them knew they were undocumented. What do you make of this? It's pretty blatant hypocrisy.
You know, I think, Joe, we need to start thinking about this in a different way. The question of the hypocrisy lays bare that this is no longer an issue of good faith. Really hasn't been for a long time. Frankly, no issue that Donald Trump is about has to do with...
I don't think we have your mic. Do we have Fernand's microphone? I don't think we have it. Okay, it's very low. All right, we're going to come back to you. We're going to get your microphone to work. And let me go to Maria Teresa, because the Costa Rica story, I'm going to read a little bit of it. It says the Washington Post spoke with 16 men and women from Costa Rica and other Latin American countries, including 6 in Santa Teresa de Cajon, who said that they were employed at the Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster. All of them said they worked for Trump without legal status and that their managers knew it. Quote, "For me, moving to the U.S. wasn't a very drastic change," said Mauricio Garro, who is 36 years old and who worked for maintenance at the golf course for 5 years until he returned to Santa Teresa de Cajon in Costa Rica in 2010. And then this quote, "My whole town practically lived there." Maria Teresa, I mean, this is pretty blatant. I mean, Donald Trump is telling his base that he agrees with them about undocumented immigrants, that he has the same disdain for them that his base has, but he doesn't. He's using them, and these employees say that their whole town was basically employed by him.
Joy, anybody who goes into basically any agricultural industry, any construction industry, I would say that what he is describing there, and this is what I think is brilliant about the article, is that it describes how not just the Trump industry, but the agricultural industry, the wine industry, parts of Hollywood industry, how all of them rely on undocumented labor. And the crux of the issue is not whether or not we like them enough, because there's a disdain for the worker, but whether or not they should actually have the rights of individuals, of humans. The president has basically dehumanized these individuals, but he definitely wants their labor in order to make his capital. And that is where the hypocrisy lies, is this disdain for a worker and trying to dehumanize them so that they do not have rights, so that they are completely marginalized in this country, so that they are in the shadows, so that they cannot claim not only their rights, but also when they are abused.
And Natasha, you know, the story that we played at the top of the broadcast, it's a documentary that was made about Donald Trump in the 1990s, the building of his empire in Trump Tower. It always surprised me that this was not a talking point during the campaign. These were not undocumented workers from Latin America, from Central America. They were mostly from Poland, and they were equally treated. They were treated the same way, paid very low wages, threatened if they tried to complain that they would be deported, that they would be reported to immigration, and mistreated in pretty blatant ways. But the bottom line and the connection between them and these Costa Rican workers who work at Bedminster is low pay, or at Mar-a-Lago, people who are working from these same countries that Donald Trump called S-holes countries, but they don't make a lot of money and they don't have any rights. Is there any... In Trump world, are they hearing these stories? Are they in any way breaking through, or are they still of the opinion or of the belief that Donald Trump would never use this kind of labor himself?
Well, the reaction that Trump and his family are having is just to fire these people outright. And so the backlash to the articles has had kind of an unintended consequence of these people have worked for the Trump family for decades, many of them. And now because of all of the people who are rightfully speaking out about the experience that they've had, they're just being summarily fired. In terms of their mistreatment and the pattern that has gone on over the last few decades of Trump's real estate empire, that is now the subject of an investigation in New Jersey. So the Bedminster Golf Club is actually the New Jersey Attorney General actually launched an investigation into whether or not they were mistreating undocumented employees, and whether or not they actually committed fraud by hiring these people in the first place. So this is yet another investigation that the president has to worry about. But in Trump world, you know, the hypocrisy has never really seemed to bother any of his supporters. I mean, if we were going to be concerned about his hypocrisy, then when he said "Buy American" constantly during the campaign, and when he had that whole week that was dedicated to, you know, buying American products and highlighting products in every state, you know, it would have seemed problematic, since most of his products, his clothing line, his vodka brand, have been made in China, Bangladesh, Vietnam. So the hypocrisy has always been there. And of course, another area where it's present is in the E-Verify system, which his own properties have not imposed, even though last year he said that he wanted to make it mandatory across the entire nation. So this is not an area where we expect to see consistency from him, but I think the talking points are just they're continually appealing to his base, and that's really all that matters.
Yeah, I mean, Michelle Goldberg, I believe that the David Fairnhold piece found that only 3 of Donald Trump's 11 properties use E-Verify. They could use it if they wanted. I mean, he's in the hospitality business. E-Verify is mainly used in the hospitality and agriculture businesses. Just a couple more data points from this Fairnhold article. Trump's Mar-a-Lago club in Florida, this Mar-a-Lago, the big club here in Florida where we are today, was seeking to hire 78 foreign workers. They asked permission to hire these 78 workers to serve as cooks, waiters, and housekeepers during this current winter's social season in Palm Beach, Florida, according to Labor Department data. So he's seeking to hire foreign labor instead of he's always saying he wants to use American labor. Another data point, Donald Trump once advocated a huge financial penalty for those who employ undocumented immigrants. He suggested that those who employ immigrants in the country illegally should face a huge financial penalty, and that it could go beyond a financial penalty. But he himself has not paid such a penalty. Michelle.
You know, my sense is that, you know, we've known about throughout his presidency, right, that he's been trying to get permission to bring people in from other countries to work in his various businesses rather than hire Americans for competitive wages. And so, but my guess is that the reason that this doesn't penetrate with his base, you know, to all of our immense kind of frustration and, you know, indignation, is that it doesn't really matter, I think, to a lot of his followers, the details of hiring illegal immigrants. It's that he expresses contempt for them, right? So they're perfectly willing to have them as kind of exploited employees. The question is whether they start to assert themselves as, you know, kind of members of the body politic, right? And so as long as he is able to be the person who wants to maintain strict racial hierarchies in this country, I think that a lot of his supporters will forgive him for exploiting people that, frankly, I think a lot of them believe deserve to be exploited.
Yeah, I think that is the point. I don't know if we have Fernand's mic back, but I think that's kind of the point, is that this is about politics. When you've heard the complaints about undocumented immigrants in the past from Republicans, it quickly follows on, then they're going to vote. They're going to vote illegally. They're going to vote for Democrats.
You know, that is the big fear. And I go back to the point I was trying to make earlier, which is I think we have to look past this issue of hypocrisy and bad faith into something perhaps even more sinister. Donald Trump clearly does not believe in this as an article of faith around immigration, Joy. I think he is so dogged on this issue simply because it's another way to divide Americans, to try and unfold this move forward that the Obama administration showed. The immigration has become a wedge issue, not just in the United States, around the world, and it's interesting to see the other people that are trying to utilize the immigration issue to destroy Western democracies around the world as we know it. So it's no surprise to me that the president continues to show utter hypocrisy on an issue that he doesn't really personally care about, but rather has political resonance.
It is political. And Maria Teresa, I want to stress that one of the other outcomes of this then is that for this base, for Donald Trump, he still has to make demonstrations. And so you have towns like Nogales in Arizona where they're literally putting up concertina wire, making the place look like a prison, knowing it isn't really needed. And the town was not consulted. The mayor, the city council are saying, wait a minute, you're making our town look like a prison just for a display. They're going to go to El Paso. I've been to El Paso. It's one of the safest cities in America. It's one of the places where immigration is the most seamless. People go back and forth across the border to Mexico. But they're going to pretend that these places are hellholes. And that has real implications for the people who have to actually live there.
Well, let's be clear. What he is trying to do is continue to define who is American, and it has everything to do who he wants to participate in our democracy. And by trying to scapegoat workers who are coming to this country undocumented, but trying to make a livelihood that he is definitely directly benefiting from, is just the beginning of what his grand plan is. He starts with undocumented. He starts with asylum seekers. He separates children from their parents. He started a denaturalization task force, meaning that if you are a naturalized citizen, there is now a task force that's going to see if they can actually pull your citizenship. That's obscene. When you go to El Paso specifically, this is what the president should be worried about. In 2014, El Paso was one of the lowest participation voters in the whole country. Joy, literally less than 20% participated in their election. Only 82,000 people in 2014 cast a ballot. In 2018, 205,000 El Pasans cast a ballot, almost pulling their same weight as presidential. Because what he is doing is that he's recognizing that in a town that's normally not political, he is coming into their territory and trying to make them feel less American, feel like they are vulnerable to an increased hostile administration and hostile country, and they are going to the ballot box.
Natasha, what Maria Teresa just described sounds long-term untenable, right? If people are being made to feel de-Americanized, under threat of even losing their naturalization, if concertina wires being put up all the way to the ground, that's actually dangerous. If somebody has a child or a dog that goes anywhere near that fencing that isn't needed, but is just there as a demonstration project so that it can be on Fox News and they can be seen to be keeping them out, people could get hurt. This could have real consequences, but it also, I don't know, it feels like the consequences for the cohesion of our society, as Fernand was saying, they seem really dire. This feels untenable.
Right, and of course we have to remember that the president now wants to send even more troops to the southern border to do virtually nothing. I mean, there were photos of the soldiers just kind of standing around because there is no crisis there. But I think, this also has real world consequences in terms of workers in this country, federal workers who now are on the brink of another shutdown because the president is insisting on building this wall, which, members of his own party have broken with him on this, and it remains to be seen. I mean, talks have apparently stalled. But this is yet another example of how his impetuousness and his desire to kind of divide people on this issue is going to perhaps affect American workers, ironically, and more than 1 million people who work for the federal government who might have to go without pay for another month. So it's not only affecting the way that Latinos see themselves in this country, but it also has an impact on the trajectory of real at-home American workers.
And people should care if the President of the United States is doing this on something he doesn't really actually care about, but that he just has to keep demonstrating. It's like a show he's putting on that has real-world consequences. Another shutdown would be devastating for these federal workers who've already been through hell. And the idea that they would do it again for something Roger Stone made up as a mnemonic device so Trump could remember what to say at rallies, these things aren't real. I think that's what is frightening to people. These aren't real policies that even Donald Trump seems to deeply care about. He's just doing it to demonstrate to Ann Coulter that he has fealty to her beliefs. It's really extraordinary. Fernand, Maria Teresa, and Michelle are going to join us throughout the show. Natasha Bertrand, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And coming up, Elizabeth Warren has officially been in the race for fewer than 24 hours, and the racist backlash is already in full effect. That's next.
Moving. That's harder now because of psoriatic arthritis.